Hey everyone, welcome back to part 6 in this tutorial series on working with UI in Unity. This will probably be the last part to this series. It turned out to be a little bit longer of a series than I expected originally. But in this one, I'm going to show how to work with the heads-up display and add some functionality and effects to that. So in one of the previous parts to this tutorial series, I made a scene called Game View, which I'm going to go to now. And this is the one I just set up quickly to show how to place some things on the screen for a heads-up display, and also how to add the options menu in so that that is usable from this view as well. So I'm going to show how to make the options menu pop up, as well as how to have an effect play when you take damage, when you use mana, and when your score increases. And yeah, so let's get started. Before I started this, I created very quickly just a blood splatter effect to use. It's just a vignette with red around the edges, and I just sort of added a little bit of texture to it. So this is just a PNG that I imported, and I'm going to use that as the effect around the edges of the screen when the player takes damage. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add into my canvas, I'm going to add a new image. So I'll go to Game Object, UI, Image, and I want this to be a child of the HUD, or the heads up display. And here in this image source, this is where I'm going to bring in my blood splat. And same way we did with buttons, we will choose set native size. Now this actually made it way too large. So I did make this at 1920 by 1080, but my canvas is scaling with screen size, so it is actually scaled down. It has scaled itself down because my scene window is smaller than my full monitor. So I'm just going to scale this down so that it fits with the screen and position it. I probably just want to set the position to 0 and 0. And I do want it to go a little bit outside of the edges because I don't want there to be any space where you can see the edge of the screen without the blood splatter effect. And the other thing that I need to do here is currently, if I were to scale my screen, I could get some weird effects where this is not staying with the edge of my screen. So let's take this back to 16 by 9. I want to choose, here's where we previously were choosing our anchor for different things. So some things we anchored to the center top or the left top. This one we actually want it to stretch with the screen. So I want it to stay with the edges of the screen whenever the screen gets resized. Now one thing that I did not do is adjust the HUD. This one was actually already set to stretch, but it is important if you have something that's a child of another element in the UI, it does receive information from that parent object. So if this was not set to stretch, that would impact my ability for my blood splatter to stretch with the screen. So now if I set this to free aspect ratio, and it's actually still not stretching with the edges, and the reason that is not working is because I actually scaled it using the scale tool, and with UI elements we really don't ever want to use this scale tool because it messes up Unity's ability to adjust the size of things. So what I actually want to do, let me go back to 16 by 9. What I actually want to do is I want to reset the scale to 1 for this, and then I want the padding or the edges around it set to 0. So this will cause it to hold the edges at the edge of the screen. So now if I set this to free aspect ratio, now when I drag this, it actually stretches the image to fill the space. So this is what will allow it to work better at screen sizes of different resolutions. The other thing that is not scaling correctly is actually this, let me hide this for a moment, the health and mana sliders, which I made previously. So I, this was meant to represent the sort of player icon. I have this bound to the bottom left corner, but I actually also need to bind these two sliders to the bottom left corner so that they stay in the correct position relative to this. And now if I set this to free aspect ratio, now the health and mana bar stays with the character icon. All right, so I fixed that, and now I have my blood splatter, and what I want to do, first thing is I want to turn off raycast target. Raycast target means that it will block when the user clicks, and I don't want the user to be able to click on this. While I'm doing that setting, changing the raycast target, I actually also want to turn off raycast target for the sliders as well, for the handle. I've hidden the handle, but just in case if I was going to have some sort of visual icon there, I would want to uncheck this box for raycast target because I don't want the user to be able to click and adjust their health using by clicking and dragging on the slider. So I am going to do that for both of these sliders. I'm just going to select the handle and uncheck raycast target. Even though I have it set to invisible, so the user shouldn't be able to click on it anyway, but if I wanted to have some kind of like icon there showing some way of showing what the health and mana was, which some games do, I would just want to make sure to turn off raycast target for that. So now I'm going to add an animation to the blood splatter vignette, and I'm going to go ahead and name this so I can find it easier. And then I'm going to go into my animations folder. I'm going to right click and create a new animation. Call it splatter. And then I'm going to select my blood splat, and I'm just going to take this splatter animation and drag it onto this blood splat object in my scene. And I can see that it created an animator controller component for me. And so now I can go to the animation tab. And what I actually want to do is add a color property. So that is under image, and I'll just hit the plus here. And the color property includes alpha. And so this is where I can set my alpha to 0. So I'm going to set my my line somewhere in the middle. I'm going to right click and add key. So I want this key to have an alpha of 1. And then if I come to the beginning here, I could delete this key and set 0 for my starting alpha. And then I want it to fade back out at the end. So I'll delete that last key and set my alpha to 0. So now I have this blood splat that fades in. I probably want it to be a little bit faster, so I'm just going to drag these keyframes around a little bit just to make it happen a little bit quicker. And then I'm going to create a new script that is going to control when this plays. So I'm going to create a hotkeys script. So a lot of times game developers will use hotkeys to be able to trigger things to happen in the game when the gameplay is not actually happening. That way they can test things out. So I'm going to make some hotkeys for basically for taking damage. So if my player was actually walking around in the world, they would step on a trap or get hit by an enemy, and that's how they would take damage. But I'm not going to have any of that gameplay. I'm just working with the UI. So I'm going to make a hotkey for it. So I'm going to create an empty game object in my scene. I'm also going to name this hotkeys. And then I'm going to attach my hotkeys script to this object. And I'm going to open up my hotkeys script. So here in this script, I'm going to add some code into the update function. I'm going to check if if input dot get key down. and then open parenthesis, and inside of parentheses here, I put key code dot, and then whatever key I want to trigger this. So this is for my damage. I'm going to use the, let's say I'll use the down arrow to take damage and the up arrow to regain health. So if I start typing down arrow, I'll see how it is spelled with the correct capitalization. So it's a capital D and a capital A. And then at the end of this line, I need open and close curly brackets. And now inside of this if statement, what I want to do when the user hits the down arrow, when they use this hotkey, I want to play the animation, and then I'm also going to take health away from the health bar. So I'm going to be actually using the UI for that. So I will need to add using Unity Engine.UI at the top. So this will allow me to access the UI elements like the slider for the health. And then at the very top above my start function, I'm going to add some public objects. So I'm going to add a public animator called blood splat, and then a public slider called health bar. Now when I take damage, I'm going to access the blood splat animator, and I'm going to trigger the animation, and then I'm also going to adjust the health bar. So the other thing that I want to do is I want to actually keep track of the player's health. So I'm going to make a private float called health, and the health bar by default is set to a maximum of 1. Let's see, which one is this? This is the mana bar. I'm going to go ahead and name this right now so I can find these. So this will be called health bar. So the default maximum value is set to 1. So I could set the maximum value here to 100 if I wanted my health to be out of 100. And then I would want to drag this value up to 100 as the start value. You can also make this use whole numbers. So this makes it always an integer value, so it's not decimals. So I am going to do 0 to 100 for the health bar, and I am going to use whole numbers. So if I come back to my script, since it's using whole numbers, I actually want to use an int instead of a float. A float uses decimals, and an int uses whole numbers. So I'm going to say health equals 100. So now when I take damage, I'm going to do health minus equals 1. So this says remove 1 from the health. Now actually 1 is going to be a very small amount out of 100, so I'm actually going to subtract 5. So this will subtract 5 from my health every time I hit the down arrow. And then I want to set a trigger on my blood splat. But I haven't actually set any triggers up yet in my animator controller. So let me minimize out of my script, come back to the blood splat, and I'm going to go to my animator window. And right now I just have this, the splatter animation is actually the default. So I need to create an empty state and set as layer default. And then I can make transition from here. The other thing, I didn't show this in one of the previous ones, but you can also use this any state. So if I right click and make transition from any state, that means regardless of whether it's in its start state or it's in its splatter state, it will always be able to just play this animation regardless of where it's at. So that's what I'm going to do. And then I'm going to add a trigger parameter called splatter, and then select my transition, and I'll hit the plus here, and automatically it fills in with the splatter animation. And we had an issue before with the has exit time. This time it is defaulted to unchecked, which is what we want here. So back in my script, now I have a trigger that I can use here. So in parentheses and in quotes. And I actually forgot if I capitalized the first letter or not. I did not. So it'll be lowercase s splatter. And add a semicolon at the end and save this script. And now let's see what happens. and I forgot to set my my variables. So I made my public variables in my script, but I forgot to actually drag them in. So I do need to drag my health bar into the health bar slot and my blood splat object into the blood splat spot. And then I also forgot to set the default alpha to this. So I want to, on the color, I'm going to set the default alpha to 0 so that the blood splat is not up by default. So now let's try that out. All right, so I am taking damage. I am getting the blood splat effect, but it is not applying that to my health bar. So the one other piece that I need to add is I need to update my health bar dot value. So this dot value, this is, if I select my slider, that is this value right here. So if I adjust this value, you can see that the health goes down there. So I'm just going to set this equal to health and save my script. Health is this variable that I'm using to keep track of the actual number for the player's health. So let's try that again. Now each time I hit the down arrow, I get the blood splatter effect and my health bar goes down a little bit. All right. One thing I might want to do, and this would be more of a personal preference, but currently the blood splatter goes over all of the other UI elements, and it really kind of depends on how you want this effect to look in your game. But if you wanted it to be behind the UI elements, you would just drag it to the top of the list within the HUD. The order things appear in the hierarchy on the canvas is the order that they get rendered. So things higher up in the hierarchy are rendered farther back. So now my blood splat effect should be behind the other UI elements. So now it is not covering up the player icon and the health bar. The other piece to the damage effect is that there should be some sound that plays when the user takes damage. And I'm going to add a sound effect just onto the blood splat itself. I already have reference to this object in my script, which I'm using in my hotkeys script. So I can use that same object to play a sound effect, since I already have a reference to it here. So I'm just going to go back into my scene real quick, and on my blood splat object, I'm going to add component, and I want audio source. And now I need to find a sound effect to play. I'm going to be using the casual game sounds effects again, which I used in the previous demos. And I have selected a few different options that I think sound like they might work for damage. So I'm just going to listen to these quickly and see which one I want to use. I think I'm going to use this third one. And another thing a lot of games do is you'll hear like sort of like a person's voice, like they've been hit by something, like oof. So you could also just like record your own voice if you wanted to for that damage effect. But I'm just going to use this one here that I think will work for this demo. And I'll just drag it into the audio clip slot on my blood splat game object. And now this is really important. I do not want play on awake to be checked. I want to control when this sound effect plays, and play on awake would make it play as soon as this object comes into existence. So now I can go back to my script, and when I take damage, after I trigger the animation and I set the new health value, I can do blood splat dot game object. So my blood splat is actually referring to the animator component. So this .game object refers to the game object that the animator is attached to. And then I would do .get component audio source open and close parentheses, and then dot play. And open and close parentheses for play as well, since that is a function call. So now I am referring to this blood splat that I have a reference to, and then I'm getting its game object, which is the object that the animator is attached to. Then I'm accessing a different component on that game object, which is the audio source component, and I am calling the play function from the audio source component, which is built-in functionality for audio source components. So now I can save my script, and let's go ahead and test it out. I just realized when I opened this up, I opened up a second copy of it, so I'm going to close this and just make sure that this change has happened in my original script. Sometimes if Visual Studio loses its connection to Unity, you can have issues where you're editing a copy of a script and it's not actually applying to the script inside of Unity. But now I can see I just have one hotkeys script selected right now, and it does have my new code here. So let's go ahead and test it and see if that works. All right, so now I have a damage effect that plays both sound effect and a vignette around the screen, and it reduces the health in my health slider bar. The next thing I want to do is I want the ability to regain health. So I am going to go back into my script, and I am going to go to just after my if input.get key down for the arrow key, and I'm going to make a second if statement here. So this is all happening inside of the update. So I want it to be before this curly bracket for the update, but outside of this first if statement. So I'm going to make a second if statement here, and it is going to be input.get key down, and then key code dot up arrow. And then I need an open and close curly brackets. And now I am ready to regain health when I press the up arrow key. So this time I would do health plus equals 5. So I can regain 5 health. And I also want to remember to update my health bar dot value to reflect that new health amount. One thing I want to be careful of here, though, is currently I would be able to go above 100 health, and similarly on my reducing health, I would have the ability to go below 0. So what I can do is I can actually add a nested if statement inside of my input if statement. So this one I would check. So when my health is going down, I want to check to make sure that my health is greater than 0. So I don't want to do this if my health is already less than or equal to 0. And I will need an open and close curly brackets. When I type the open curly bracket, it automatically puts my second one here. So I'm going to delete that one, and I'm going to place it after all of the damage code. So I only want this damage code to play if my health is greater than 0. Now in my second one, I want to check if my health is less than 100. So I don't want to do this code if my health is equal to or greater than 100. Since I'm only doing increments of 5, I should not be able to go above 100 or below 0. So this should keep that within the values of 0 to 100. So I'm going to go ahead and save that script and test out that functionality. And the other thing I'll want to do is I'll probably want to add some kind of effect for when the health goes up. So I have my health can go up, but there's no cool effects playing. So now I want to figure out what visual elements can I add to the health going up that would let the player know that their health is increasing and give them that valuable user feedback. One of the things I could do is I could add an animation on the health bar. I could maybe make it flash green when it's regaining health. So to do that, I would create a new animation in my animations folder. I'm going to call it flash green. And then select my health bar object in my hierarchy and drag that new animation onto the health bar. And just as it always does, we have now created an animator component, and I want to be sure to go to my animator window, and I don't want this to be the default. So I'm going to create a new empty state and make this the default state. And then I'm going to do from any state, make transition to the flash green, and I will need a parameter for this. And I'm just going to call it flash. Then if I select my transition and I hit the plus under conditions, it will default to that flash trigger that I just made. Then I would go to my animation window and select my health bar again. Make sure I have the correct animation selected here. I only have one animation, so this is the correct one. And then I'm actually going to be adjusting the fill area. This is the part that is the reddish color. And so then if I go under fill and image, one of the options here is color. And so what I can do is I can go somewhere sort of in the middle, and I'm going to set the R and B values to 0. And then I actually kind of like that shade of green. I could increase or decrease how green I want it to be. And then I probably want this to be a little bit faster, so I am just going to drag these keyframes around. All right, and so next I need to go back to my script to trigger that animation. So this would be in my health increase section of my code, and here I would do health bar dot get component animator dot set trigger, and I named my trigger flash with a lowercase f and end that line with a semicolon. So this does is this finds my health bar object that I have a reference to. It gets the animator component on that object, and it triggers the flash transition, which plays the animation that I just created. So I'll go ahead and save that and test it out. So I can see the green flashes when my health is increasing. Another nice thing to add to this might be to have a little plus and a number, so like +5, that pops up above this to let the user know how much health they have regained. So I would do this by creating a UI text object. I want to make sure that this is a child of the HUD. And then I would position this right above the health bar. And I want to make sure to bind this to the bottom left corner so it stays with all of these other UI elements. I probably want the color to be green since it is letting the user know they are regaining health. And I'm going to set this text to +5. I don't need all this extra space here, so I can reduce the width here to 30. And let's just look in the game window. That looks pretty good. And so then what I would do is create an animation for this as well. So I'm going to create another new animation. I'll call this +5 so that I can find it more easily. And I'm just going to drag it onto that text object. And then I'll go to my animation window, add property, text and color. And we did one of these before with the alpha value. So to do that, I would just right click in this space on the second bar here and add key. Then I would come to the beginning, delete this first key, and set my start alpha to 0. Same at the end, delete the last key and set my alpha to 0. And I definitely want this animation to be faster. All right, and I probably also should have a sound effect when my health is going up. So I'll just attach the sound effect to this text object since I'm going to need to reference it to trigger the animation. I can also trigger the sound effect in the same place. Back in my sound effects folder, I'm going to try this one here. All right. And then I'll just drag that into my audio clip slot on the text object. Make sure to uncheck play on awake since we want to trigger it from a script. Now back in my script, I want to make a new public object. This is going to be a game object. I'm going to call it +5, no spaces. It's important not to use any spaces in variable names. Then in my code where I'm increasing the health, I'll do +5 dot get component. First I'll do the audio source dot play. And then +5 dot get component. Animator dot set trigger. And I don't actually remember what I named my trigger, so I'm going to go back to my animator window with my text selected, and I didn't actually make it yet. So just like we did in the previous one, I'll create a new empty state, set it as the default, then from any state make transition to that animation, create a new trigger. Sticking with the same naming convention, I'm just going to call this +5, and then hit the plus under conditions to add the +5 trigger down here. So now in my script, I can put the trigger to say +5 and save my script. Then on my hotkeys object, I do need to give reference to this +5 text object. And last but not least, I want to start the alpha at 0 for this one. Now let's see how it works. And I notice my +5 animation is actually a little bit too fast, particularly because it finishes before the health bar. So I can just go back to my animation and stretch this out a little bit and try it again. All right, that looks pretty good. Now, everything I've done with my health bar, I could replicate to do basically the exact same thing with my mana bar, except probably using different sound effects and different visual effects. I might have some sort of particle effect that plays to show that I'm casting a spell, or if instead of mana, if I wanted ammo, I could have an icon for a gun with a counter for how much ammo is left. So the next thing I'm going to demo is how to increase the score. And so I'm going to go back to my hotkeys script, and I need another public variable for this. This one is going to be a text, and I'm going to call this score display. And I probably want a private int that is the actual score that I'm keeping track of. And I'm going to start that equal to 0. So I'm going to need a new hotkey. I already used the up arrow and the down arrow. So now I'm going to add another if statement here. And I'm going to use the spacebar. So this time I will do score plus equals 1. So I want the score to go up by 1 each time. And then score display dot text with a lowercase t. So this text with a uppercase t, this is a component. So this is the text component, which is this whole block here. Lowercase t, sorry, let me actually select my score. So capital T is the entire block here. Lowercase t refers to just the text inside of this box. So when I do this lowercase t in my script, this is the actual text in the text box. So here I would put score. And this score value is an int, and I actually have to display it as a string. So to do that, we can cast it to a string by using toString with an open and close parenthesis and end that with a semicolon. And save. Then back in my scene, I can test this out. And I forgot to actually give the reference to the object. So gotta always remember to drag the object into the hotkeys slot, into the slot for that object on the hotkeys script. And I can see it actually took away my score, the word score. So to fix that, what we would do is where we're setting our display text, we would add in quotes score with a semicolon and a space, and then end quote. And then we use plus to concatenate two different string values into one. So this plus says take this string and then add this string to the end of it. And save that. And now let's see if that works. So now my score is increasing every time I hit the spacebar. Obviously, I would want a sound effect to play, so I can add on my score text an audio source, uncheck the box for play on awake, find a sound effect to use, and drag it into that audio clip slot. Then in my script, I would add score display dot game object dot get component audio source dot play. So this is getting the game object associated with my score display, which is I only have to do this if I'm using a specific component to reference it. So I am referencing it by its text component. So I just need to access the game object part of that to get a different component. I could also animate, for this one, it would probably be nice to animate the outline, which is another aspect that you can animate using the animation window. But for now, let's test it out just with the sound effect. All right, so now I have a pretty interactive heads-up display that allows me to take damage, regain health, and gain points. One thing that might be useful here is if I have a certain number of points and once the player reaches that score, then they can level up. So that's a pretty easy thing to add. In our script, what we would do is we would check if score equals 10. I'll say this is the level up value. So we would do something specific when the score equals 10. Otherwise, so else, and I'm going to put that close curly bracket at the end of these three. So this else will do the code that we just did here. So everything other than score equals 10, I'm going to do this value here. So actually, one issue with this is my score plus equals 1. So I actually want this to happen before the if check. I want the score to go up by 1, and then I want to see is my score equal to 10. If so, I'm going to do something special in here. If not, I would do this code in here. So this would allow me to play a special animation or maybe some special pop-up text. I probably do also still want this score display text to be updated. And then here I will play a special sound effect and a special pop-up text. So let me save this, and I'm going to go back to my scene and add that object. So I'm going to create a new game object UI text, and this is going to say level up. And I'm going to choose one of my fancy fonts. And I definitely want this font text to be bigger. And I want the color to be very bright. Maybe yellow. And then I'm going to pick a different one of my fonts. Let's do this one. And then I am going to also add an outline. I do want to make sure that text is very clear and easy to read, so the outline helps with that. I might make this even a little bit larger of a font size. And if I make it too large, I do have to remember to increase my width and height. I think just the height will work for this. And I'm going to set my text to be in the center of this text box. And then I'm going to make sure my X and Y value is set to 0. I do want this to be in the very center of the screen. So that looks pretty good. And I noticed that my score text is actually not centered. So I might want to go ahead and center that right now also. So I would center this in its text field and then make sure that the X value is set to 0 here. So now my score is centered. And so this level up text, I want to add it to my HUD. I'm going to rename it level up. And I'm going to add an audio source, uncheck play on awake. And I have a level up sound effect I'm going to use. And then I'm going to create an animation for this called level up. Drag that onto the object. Make sure it created our animator component. And I'm going to go into that animator window and create an empty state. Set it as the default state. Make a transition from any state. Add a trigger called level up. Set that trigger to be the thing that causes this transition to happen. Then I need to actually make the animation itself in the animation window. Make sure that I have the correct animation selected here. And then I'm going to go to text and color. And I want it to fade in. So I'll right click in the middle, add key. Then at the start, set the alpha to 0. And you'll notice that it does actually make the outline invisible also. So it's this alpha for the text determines also whether or not the outline is visible. And then I'll delete this one at the end, set the alpha to 0 again at the end. And I want to make sure my starting alpha for my font is 0, and it looks like it is. So now in my script, I need a new public object. This one's going to be a game object, and I'm going to call this one level text. Now in my level up section here, I'll do level text dot get component audio source dot play and level text dot get component animator dot set trigger. And I think I called this one level up. End that line with a semicolon and save my script. And now let's see if it works. And actually, let me go back to that level up text. It did not actually save the alpha as 0. So let's go ahead and fix that real quick. And I don't want this to block my ability to click on things behind it, so I'm going to uncheck the box for raycast target. We did this for some other UI elements in the HUD. Generally, you don't want the HUD to block your ability to click on other things in the scene unless it is an interactive part of the HUD. And I forgot to give it the reference and my hotkeys. Don't forget, we always have to drag in that new object into our hotkeys, which I forgot to do. That's what this unassigned reference means. If you ever see that pop up down here, it means you did not assign a specific object to a variable. All right, now I have a level up. I could also add some particle effects to this. Previously, I set up particle effects to run in the canvas, but for this one, we probably would have some things in our game scene. So I'm going to show how to just create a particle effect in front of the camera. This is the first place where I'm doing this because everything else up until now has been entirely inside of the UI. But part of the user experience is sometimes effects that happen in the scene in front of the camera. So I'm just going to create an empty game object with a particle system. And I am positioning this directly in front of the camera. So if I go to the game view, I can see that it is playing right in front of the camera. And you do want to make sure that it is in front of the camera, not behind the camera. So you can see the blue arrow is the direction my camera is facing, and it is facing at these particles. So under renderer, I would select the material. I'm going to just use the default particle, and I'm going to make these yellow. And I probably want to use a burst instead of rate over time. So I'll set rate over time to 0 and add a burst. For something like leveling up, I like to have the particle sort of going upward. So to accomplish that, you can give the gravity modifier a negative value. And I'm going to reduce my duration to 1 and my start lifetime to 1. Now I'm also going to lower this down a little bit so that it starts. I actually want it to start below the camera. And maybe duration of 2 and lifetime of 2. So that it makes it all the way off the top of the screen. And I could also reduce the start size a little bit. And one other nice thing I like to do with having particles that are going to rise up like this is you can change your shape to a box. And you can actually have the box go long ways. So I can adjust the scale here of my X. And I want it to go all the way across the screen. And I could also add a trail. And we want to make sure to give the trail material a value as well. And one fun thing you can do with particles is you can add velocity over lifetime. And you can make this, instead of a linear value, you could change this to random between two curves. And then you can actually edit these curves. And I'm not going to do a whole lot with this. I'm just going to mess around with it just a little bit to give an example to show how you can get some variation between these. And so now you can see they're starting to move around a little bit. They're not moving a whole lot because my maximum value on each of these is 1. So I could adjust this to, say, 5. And so that's actually kind of a cool effect. And then I would want to be able to trigger this particle effect when I want it to play. So I'm going to uncheck, first of all, I'm going to uncheck the box for looping. I only want it to play once. Then I'll uncheck the box for play on awake. Then my script needs a reference to this object so I can trigger it. So I'll make public particle system called level particles. And then in my level up section, I would do level particles dot play, open and close parenthesis. So this plays that particle effect when I call this. And don't forget to give that game object to the hotkeys. So drag that into the slot on my hotkeys so it has a reference to it. Now let's see that play out. So the particles happen quite a bit slower than the text. So I'm going to reduce the duration and the lifetime so that that happens faster. So I'm going to set these both to 1, and I am going to increase the start speed, let's say 8. And I'm going to set it to looping just so that I can see it playing in my game window. So I do want to make sure these get all the way to the top. So one of the ways I can do that is I can adjust the y value for my velocity over time. So I could make this 10. So now they're making it all the way to the top of the screen. I could also adjust my color over lifetime to make it just a little bit more interesting. So maybe I want it to have some more of a greenish tint in the middle. Or maybe actually more of a goldish tint. So it's just not the same color the whole time. And now that I have my particles playing a little bit faster, I want to make sure to uncheck looping again. And I'm also going to position it just a tiny bit lower and test it one more time. And then I have my damage, my health, and my score all functional. So that hopefully gives you an idea of how you can make your heads-up display functional and add some juiciness to the UI elements in the heads-up display. I hope you found this series helpful, and I hope you enjoyed this section on functional heads-up displays. Thanks for watching.